Didn't Reagan make his farewell address to some federal employees day before yesterday?
He has not said goodbye to me yet.
What?
He has not said goodbye to me yet. He said to say goodbye to you, sir.
Well, I'm going to say goodbye to you. It's a cruel crowd here tonight.
You are so cuddly. You're cuddly.
You say that to all the fats.
No, I don't.
When you're fat, you either cuddly or you making a lot of money throwing guys out of the ring.
Now, are you calling yourself fat now? You're about in between, right? From what you go up, you go down.
Well, there's a lot of guys fatter than me, but there's a lot of guys skinny than me, and
Back in the days of late-night TV, Johnny Carson was pretty much the king of the talk show world. He kept millions of people entertained night after night with his dry humor, quick comebacks, and that classic on-camera charm. What most people didn't see, though, was the controlled chaos happening behind the curtain. The producers were always on edge, doing their best to smooth over slip-ups, awkward moments, or anything that might throw the show off track. Every now and then, things got messy, whether it was a guest accidentally letting a bad word slip, a so-called psychic falling apart under pressure, or Johnny himself having to think fast to keep the show from going sideways. In this video, we're going to take a look at some of those behind-the-scenes moments from Carson's world that weren't really meant for the public eye, but we managed to dig them up.
Okay. Hard as a carpet. Is this really frozen or is
No, it's a piece of wood.
What?
A piece of wood in there.
Well, that's not a good buy, is it?
Before we get into all the juicy behind-the-scenes stuff about Johnny Carson, let's take a moment to really get a feel for who this guy was, because he was so much more than just another face on TV. For 30 years, from 1962 all the way to 1992, Johnny Carson didn't just host The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson. He basically turned it into this massive cultural juggernaut that defined what late-night television could be. We're talking about a show that wasn't just popular, it was practically a nightly ritual for millions of Americans, whether they were tuning in from their living rooms in Nebraska or Hollywood. If you were a comedian, an actor, or a musician back in those days, getting a spot on Carson's show was like hitting the jackpot. It could launch your career into the stratosphere. A single appearance, especially if Johnny gave you that little nod of approval, like a raised eyebrow, a genuine laugh, or, the Holy Grail, an invite to sit at his desk after your set, could mean you were on your way to becoming a household name. When you watched Johnny on screen, he was this perfect blend of sharp, funny, and totally in command, like he was born to sit behind that desk and charm the socks off everyone. Growing up in Norfolk, Nebraska, he had this Midwestern warmth that made him feel like your cool uncle, but with this razor-sharp wit that could keep up with anyone. From A-list stars like Frank Sinatra to some random guy with a weird talent in a segment like Stump the Band. His little quirks, like that fake golf swing he'd do at the end of his monologues, or the way he'd say, "Here's Johnny," which, by the way, got totally immortalized in The Shining, just became part of the American fabric. He hosted something like 4,000 episodes and had over 22,000 guests, which is wild to think about, and every night he made it look so effortless, turning even the most awkward guest moments into comedy gold that had everyone at home cracking up. But here's the thing, off camera, Johnny was a whole different story, and not in the way you might expect from someone who seemed so open and approachable on TV. Carson had a reputation for being, let's say, complicated. The guy was super private, like almost to a fault, and even the people who worked with him every single day, like his sidekick Ed McMahon, would tell you it was hard to really get close to him. On air, he was all smiles and quick one-liners. But as soon as the cameras stopped rolling, he'd kind of retreat into this shell, keeping most folks at arm's length. Ed even wrote in his book Here's Johnny that Carson was like a mystery wrapped in an enigma. charming the world on stage but super guarded once the spotlight was off. That contrast was something that always fascinated people who knew him, because how could someone so magnetic in front of an audience be so distant behind the scenes? And that brings us to the moment producers tried to bury. In the summer of 1987, Johnny Carson, who had just married his fourth wife, Alexis Moss, a gorgeous woman 26 years younger than him, was off on what sounds like the most swoon-worthy honeymoon. A yacht gliding through the crystal-clear waters of the Italian Riviera. You're probably thinking candlelit dinners, clinking wine glasses, and pure newlywed magic, right? Well, hold that thought, because when you're hitched to Johnny Carson, things can take a turn that's less romance and more soap opera. So, here's the deal, based on stories that leaked out later, because, let's face it, nothing stays hushed when you're as big a deal as Carson. The mood on that yacht wasn't exactly dripping with love. Johnny had a knack for getting grumpy off camera, and something got under his skin that day. Maybe the crew poured him the wrong kind of wine. He was super picky about that stuff. Or maybe the Mediterranean breeze dared to mess with his iconic, perfectly styled hair. Whatever it was, Johnny was in a funk. And then Alexis, probably just trying to keep things light and enjoy the moment, said something totally harmless. But Johnny didn't like it. You'd expect Johnny to nod, maybe play it cool until they were alone, or at least flash that famous smile. But oh no, not this time. Right there, in front of the yacht's guests and crew, he let loose. "We've been married for 3 weeks. If you say something like that again, this marriage won't last another 3 weeks." Yikes. Can you imagine the vibe after that? This wasn't some quiet little argument behind closed doors. It was Johnny Carson, the guy who made millions laugh every night, throwing out a verbal dagger in front of an audience on his honeymoon of all time. Word of this moment, which popped up in tabloids and books like Lawrence Lemer's King of the Night, The Life of Johnny Carson, gave everyone a peek into Johnny's sharper side. The producers and staff who heard about it were horrified, but not exactly shocked. They knew Johnny could be a bit of a storm cloud when he wasn't on air. His team tried to keep the whole thing quiet, but when you're Johnny Carson, gossip spreads faster than a yacht at full throttle. To put this in perspective, Johnny's track record with relationships was already a bit rocky by 1987. He'd been through 3 marriages before Alexis. Jody Wolcott from 1948 to 1963, with whom he had 3 sons. Joanne Copeland from 1963 to 1972, and Joanna Holland from 1972 to 1975-1985. Those marriages had their share of drama, with whispers of cheating, emotional distance, and even some struggles with drinking that made headlines over the years. Alexis, who was 35 when they got married, seemed like a new chapter for Johnny, and their marriage did last until his death in 2005, so they clearly found a way to navigate moments like this. But that yacht incident? It was a neon sign that even on a dreamy Italian honeymoon, Johnny's temper could steal the show.
Anniversary. This is Ed McMahon along with Doc Severson and the NBC Orchestra inviting you to join Johnny as we celebrate 25 years of late-night entertainment. Webb, Ronald Reagan, Richard Nixon, Martin Luther King Jr., Robert Kennedy, Judy Garland, Liza Minnelli, Lena Horne, Diana Ross, the Jackson 5, Tina Turner, Paul Simon.
Fast forward a few months later. NBC is pulling out all the stops to celebrate his 25th anniversary as the King of the Tonight Show. We're talking a massive glitzy bash aboard the Queen Mary, that iconic ocean liner turned floating venue in Long Beach, California. Fancy doesn't even begin to cover it. The guest list is a who's who of Hollywood and beyond. Big shot network executives, A-list celebrities like Frank Sinatra and Bob Hope, close friends, family, and of course, the media, all there to toast Johnny's incredible run. Oh, and Johnny's son, Rick Carson, is there too, which, as you'll see, is where things take a sharp left turn. Now, a bit of background on Rick to set the stage. Rick, Johnny's middle son from his first marriage to Jody Wolcott, had a rough go of it. By 1987, he was in his 30s and grappling with serious mental health issues and SA problems, which were no secret to those close to the family. His relationship with his dad was, to put it mildly, complicated. Johnny, for all his charm on screen, wasn't exactly winning Father of the Year awards. Stories from books like King of the Night by Lawrence Leamer and other accounts paint him as emotionally distant with his kids, often more focused on his career than family life. Rick, in particular, seemed to bear the brunt of that disconnect, and their interactions could be tense even on good days. Add drinks to the mix, and, well, you've got a recipe for disaster. So, back to the Queen Mary. The party's in full swing, everyone's dressed to the nines, and Johnny's being hailed as the legend he is. 25 years of making America laugh, launching careers, and turning The Tonight Show into a cultural juggernaut. But then Rick, who's been hitting the bar hard, starts drawing attention for all the wrong reasons. He's visibly struggling, and it's not the kind of thing you can just ignore at an event like this. Johnny, who, let's be honest, wasn't exactly a saint when he'd had a few himself, stories of his own drinking binges were well known, decides to step in and check on his son. Maybe he thought he could handle it quietly, but with Johnny, things could escalate fast when his temper kicked in. What happens next is the kind of scene you'd expect in a dramatic movie, not at a swanky anniversary party. According to reports that later surfaced in the press and tell-alls, Johnny and Rick get into a screaming match that makes the Titanic's collision look like a minor fender bender. We're talking full-on, in-your-face shouting, right there in front of everyone, friends, family, NBC execs, celebrities, and, worst of all, the media, who are eating this up like it's the main course. Johnny, who could be razor-sharp with his words, reportedly lays into Rick, and it's not just a father-son spat, it's a public spectacle. Things get so heated that, according to some accounts, it looked like Johnny was about to throw a punch at his own son. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Producers and NBC folks were absolutely horrified, scrambling to do damage control while the party was still going on. They tried to brush it off as Johnny being Johnny, playing up his reputation for being a bit volatile when he was in a mood. But that excuse didn't hold water. This wasn't just a bad look. It was a full-blown PR nightmare. The media had a field day, with headlines splashing the story across tabloids and entertainment columns, painting Johnny as a hot-headed father who couldn't keep it together even at his own milestone event. So why exactly did Carson act this way? Well, if you listen to the people who knew him and dig into his story, a lot of it seems to trace back to his upbringing. And man, it's a doozy. Johnny himself didn't hold back when talking about his mother, Ruth Carson, once calling her the toughest son of a bee of them all, and comparing her to Lady Macbeth, saying, "There is no goddamn way to please that woman." That's some serious, deep-rooted resentment. And when Ruth died in 1985, Johnny didn't even go to her funeral, reportedly saying, "The Wicked Witch is dead." That kind of bitterness doesn't just vanish. It weaves itself into how you deal with people, from your marriages to your friendships to, even how you handle guests on your show. Johnny grew up in Norfolk, Nebraska, born in 1925 to Ruth and Homer Carson, who worked as a power company manager. On the surface, it was a solid Midwestern life, but emotionally, not so warm. Ruth was described as critical, demanding, and stingy with affection, and Johnny felt like nothing he did was ever good enough for her. Even when he was at the height of his fame, hosting The Tonight Show and basically owning late-night TV, Ruth would downplay his success, calling his show silly, or sending back gifts he'd sent her, according to books like King of the Night by Lawrence Leamer. That kind of rejection from a parent doesn't just sting, it shapes you. For Johnny, it seemed to build this emotional wall where he learned to keep people at arm's length and could get sharp when he felt vulnerable or crossed. It's like he inherited Ruth's knack for cutting remarks but turned it outward, and it showed up in some of his most memorable blow-ups. Take his personal life, for instance. By 1987, Johnny was on his fourth marriage with Alexis Moss, and we've already heard about that icy moment on their Italian yacht honeymoon when he snapped at her in front of guests, saying their marriage wouldn't last another 3 weeks if she kept making comments like, "This view is beautiful." His 3 earlier marriages to Jody Wolcott, 1948 to 1963, Joanne Copeland, 1963 to 1972, and Joanna Holland, 1972 to 1979, 1985, were no picnic either, with stories of cheating, emotional distance, and his struggles with drinking popping up in tabloids and tell-alls. His relationship with his sons, Chris, Rick, and Corey, was just as fraught. That 1987 Queen Mary party, where he got into a screaming match with Rick so bad it nearly turned physical, was a public example of how strained things were. Johnny was a provider, sure, but emotionally, he kept his kids at a distance, and that seemed to echo the coldness he felt from his mother growing up. So, when you look at why Johnny acted the way he did, it's like a puzzle. A kid who grew up craving approval he never got. A man who could charm a nation but struggle with those closest to him. And a star whose brilliance came with a bite that could leave a lasting mark. One of the lesser-known but sadder chapters in Johnny Carson's family history involves his only granddaughter, Crystal. She was the daughter of Carson's son, Chris, from a relationship that Johnny reportedly never approved of. According to Crystal's mother, Tanina Love, Johnny discouraged the relationship and made it clear that he wanted no involvement in her child's life. At the time, there was even some question of paternity, and Johnny's longtime lawyer and confidant, Henry Bushkin, arranged for a blood test to settle the matter. The test confirmed that Crystal was indeed Chris Carson's daughter, making her Johnny's granddaughter. But that didn't change the situation. Chris Carson, who was living in Florida and trying to pursue a career as a professional golfer, had been receiving financial support from his father in the form of a monthly stipend. According to Bushkin's accounts, Johnny made it very clear that if Chris wanted to remain in his good graces and continue to benefit from the family's estate, he would have to end his relationship with Tanina and distance himself from his daughter. That ultimatum left Chris with a painful choice: either maintain a relationship with his child and risk losing financial and emotional support from his powerful father, or follow Johnny's wishes and cut ties. In the end, Chris chose to abide by his father's demands, and Crystal grew up largely estranged from the Carson family. It's a story that doesn't often make it into the highlight reels of Johnny Carson's life, but it underscores just how complicated and sometimes heartbreaking his personal relationships could be, even while he was adored by millions of viewers on screen. Oh, and just when you think Carson's story couldn't take another turn, there's the whole controversy about the so-called tape. Back in 2014, reports surfaced about a private recording that appeared to show a much younger Johnny Carson in an intimate situation. From what was said at the time, it had supposedly been filmed by one of his wives, though the details were never entirely clear. The tape was allegedly offered to Carson's estate, but they declined and quickly threatened legal action to keep it out of circulation. While only a handful of still images ever made their way into the public eye, the whispers about its existence were enough to stir up plenty of speculation. It's one of those strange footnotes in pop culture history, a reminder that even someone who seemed untouchable on television wasn't immune to rumors and scandals, especially in a media landscape that thrives on digging into the private lives of public figures. And honestly, if this had come out in today's 24/7 gossip cycle, it would have blown up far bigger than it did at the time. Carson's personal story also has its tragedies. In 1991, his son Richard, often called Rick, died in a car accident when his vehicle went over a cliff in Morro Bay, California. He was only 39 years old. Carson spoke about the loss on The Tonight Show, and while his words were moving, some who knew the family felt there were unresolved wounds between father and son. Their relationship had been strained, and Rick had faced struggles with mental health that Carson wasn't always present for, which left behind a complicated legacy of grief. As for Carson himself, he lived a relatively quiet life after stepping away from The Tonight Show in 1992. He rarely appeared in public, choosing instead to spend time on hobbies like playing tennis, reading, and writing jokes for friends. In 2005, he passed away at the age of 79 from respiratory failure brought on by emphysema, the result of decades of heavy smoking. One of his most famous sign-offs on The Tonight Show was, "I bid you a very heartfelt good night." It was a fitting farewell, and in many ways, it's how people still remember him, as the man who, night after night, brought humor and a sense of calm into millions of living rooms, even if the person behind the desk was far more complicated than the image on screen. So there you have it. If you like this deep dive into late-night drama, hit that like button, subscribe for more weird Hollywood history, and drop a comment below. What do you think was Carson's most shocking moment?